Alexander Morgan froze mid-step as the sharp sound of screeching tires shattered the peaceful morning. He turned just in time to see the hulking biker shove an elderly man aside, groceries spilling onto the pavement. The biker's roar of laughter echoed as he kicked an apple toward the gutter. "What are you looking at, old man?" he growled, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Little did he know, the man he was trying to intimidate wasn't just another small-town bookstore owner. Alexander Morgan had survived war zones, trained elite tactical units, and faced men far more dangerous than the smug biker standing before him. But Alexander didn't flinch. He simply locked eyes with the man, calm and unreadable. Alexander had moved to Everstone seeking tranquility, hoping to leave behind the intensity of his military past. His cozy bookstore, Ink and Quill, was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in literature and help the community. The town adored him. Customers trusted his book recommendations, often lingering for conversations about life and philosophy. His gentle demeanor and insightful mind earned him respect and loyalty, but for all his kindness, Alexander carried an air of mystery. Occasionally, townsfolk whispered about his past. "He moves too quietly, like he's always on alert," an old woman had once remarked. Others dismissed it, chalking it up to his bookish nature. But Alexander's past was more complex than anyone in Everstone could imagine. That morning, Everstone's peace was shattered as Dane Carter and his gang roared into town. Their leather jackets were adorned with patches from a notorious biker club. The sound of their engines rattled windows, and their loud laughter unsettled everyone within earshot. Dane was a man who thrived on chaos. His gang wasn't just a group of friends, they were predators, always looking for a target. For weeks, they had been terrorizing neighboring towns, vandalizing stores, and intimidating locals. Everstone, a quiet haven, seemed like the perfect place for their next act of dominance. Dane's gaze scanned the streets, searching for someone who looked vulnerable enough to amuse him. That's when his eyes landed on Alexander, standing outside his shop, calmly watching them. Dane grinned, nudging his second-in-command, Eric. "Look at him, standing there like he owns the place. Bet he's just another soft, small-town guy. Easy pickings." Unbeknownst to Dane, Alexander had already assessed the group. He noted their aggressive postures, the way their hands lingered near their jackets, likely concealing weapons. His military instincts kicked in, but he stayed rooted, his expression betraying nothing. The gang approached, their boots crunching against the gravel. One of them, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, sneered at the bookstore sign. "Ink and Quill? What a joke," he jeered. "You write poems in there, old man?" Alexander's voice was steady and low as he replied, "Can I help you?" Dane smirked, leaning closer. "Yeah, you can help us. We're looking for some entertainment, and you seem like you could use some company." For a moment, the air grew tense. Alexander's unwavering gaze locked onto Dane's. The bikers expected him to shrink back, maybe even beg them to leave. Instead, he smiled faintly, his calm demeanor unsettling them in a way they couldn't quite place. "Sorry," Alexander replied, his tone polite but cool. "I don't entertain bullies." Dane's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he barked a laugh. "You've got a mouth on you, don't you?" he said, stepping closer. "Let's see if you're as tough as you act." Alexander stood his ground, his expression unchanging. Inside, his mind raced as he planned his next move. Years of military training had taught him one thing above all else: never show fear, especially to predators. The bikers, frustrated by his lack of reaction, began to hurl insults and threats. Dane, now visibly irritated, kicked over a planter by the shop entrance. "We're just getting started, old man," he snarled. Inside the shop, a golden retriever lying by the counter growled softly, sensing the tension outside. Alexander glanced over his shoulder at the dog, a flicker of something dangerous passing through his eyes. Dane noticed it, but couldn't quite put his finger on why it unsettled him. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Alexander finally said, his voice quiet but firm. The warning in his tone sent a chill down Dane's spine, though he quickly shook it off, laughing nervously as his gang joined in. Alexander's calm facade masked the storm brewing inside him. He knew this wasn't over. The bell above the door jingled sharply as the gang shoved their way into Ink and Quill. The tiny shop, with its warm wooden shelves and soft lighting, seemed out of place with the rowdy energy they brought. Dane's boots scuffed against the polished floor as he looked around, sneering. "This is what you do all day?" he scoffed, picking up a book from a display. "Selling fairy tales?" Another biker, Eric, ran a finger along the counter, flicking away imaginary dust. "Must be real hard work, huh? Flipping pages and playing librarian." Alexander watched silently as the gang spread out. His gaze flicked over each of them, cataloguing their movements. The scarred man was eyeing the register. Another was inspecting the framed photos on the wall, pictures of Alexander with locals, smiling with their children and books. Dane leaned casually against a shelf, his eyes daring Alexander to react. "Is there something you need?" Alexander said finally, his voice steady. "Or are you just here to make trouble?" His calmness unsettled them, though they didn't show it. Dane smirked wider, mistaking Alexander's lack of reaction for weakness. "Yeah, we need something," he said. "Entertainment, and you look like just the kind of uptight old man who could use some loosening up." Eric snickered. "Maybe he can read us a bedtime story. Start with you, Dane. You've always been scared of the dark." Alexander ignored the laughter, his eyes sharp as he observed their movements. He noticed the way Dane kept his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, ready to pounce. Eric's gaze darted around the room, calculating exits. The scarred man's hand lingered near his pocket, where a bulge suggested he might be carrying a knife. "If you're done wasting my time, I have work to do," Alexander said firmly, "and I don't tolerate people disrespecting my shop or my customers." The scarred man snorted. Big words for a guy selling paperbacks. Alexander bent down to pick up a fallen book, his movements controlled. "You'd be surprised what kind of people end up running places like this," he said casually. "Not everyone shares their full story right away." Dane narrowed his eyes. The laughter died on his lips. Something about the way Alexander spoke, calm, measured, unbothered, unnerved him. It wasn't arrogance or fear, it was control. "Is that so?" Dane asked, stepping closer. "And what's your story, old man? You some washed-up teacher? A failed writer?" Alexander straightened, meeting Dane's gaze without blinking. "Just someone who knows how to handle himself," he replied simply. For the first time since entering, Dane hesitated. His instincts, honed from years of bullying and intimidation, told him Alexander wasn't bluffing, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Eric grabbed a coffee mug from the counter, tossing it between his hands. "Handle himself, huh? That a threat, Gramps?" Alexander's lips twitched in what could almost be a smile. A warning. The room fell silent, the tension crackling like static. Dane laughed suddenly, breaking the stillness. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but guts don't mean much when you're outnumbered." Alexander didn't respond. Instead, he stepped back behind the counter, his movements smooth and unhurried. "Are you done?" he asked, his tone cool. "Because I have customers to serve." The bikers exchanged glances, unsure whether to push further or back off. Dane, unwilling to lose face, leaned over the counter, bringing his face inches from Alexander's. "We're just getting started," he said, his voice low and threatening. Alexander met his glare, unflinching. "So am I," he replied, his tone calm but carrying an edge that sent a ripple of unease through the group. At that moment, the bell above the door jingled again. A young man walked in, a leash in his hand, his Labrador wagging its tail. He froze, taking in the scene. The bikers, the overturned chair, Alexander standing firm. "Is everything okay here?" the man asked cautiously. Dane turned, his grin returning. "Oh, we're just having a friendly chat," he said smoothly. "No need to worry." Alexander's voice cut through the tension. "Why don't you come back later, Jason?" Jason hesitated, glancing at the bikers. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Alexander replied firmly. His tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, Jason left, the Labrador looking back as the door swung shut. Outside, a few townsfolk had gathered, watching nervously. The tension in the shop was palpable, a wire stretched too tight. Dane leaned back, smirking. "You're all alone here. No one's going to help you." Alexander's expression didn't change. "I've been alone before. Doesn't mean I'm helpless." His words landed like a blow, shattering the bikers' half-confidence. They didn't know what kind of man they were dealing with, but they were starting to realize he wasn't what he seemed. For the first time, they questioned whether they'd picked the wrong target. The sound of sirens in the distance made Dane's head snap up. His smirk faltered, replaced by a scowl. "We'll be back," he snarled, leading his gang out the door. Alexander watched them go, his expression unreadable. As the sirens grew louder, he exhaled slowly, his grip on the counter relaxing. Justice would come. For now, he had won the first battle. But he knew the war wasn't over. Later that afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows over Everstone, Alexander stood outside Ink and Quill, surveying the damage. The planter was shattered, a chair overturned, but nothing irreparable. The golden retriever sat loyally at his feet, its watchful eyes scanning the street. Sheriff Mallory Hayes pulled up in her cruiser, stepping out with a knowing look. "I heard we had some visitors," she said, crossing her arms. Alexander nodded. "They'll be back, but I don't think they'll find what they're looking for." Mallory's eyes narrowed. "Do you need backup?" Alexander shook his head. "Not yet. Just make sure the town knows to stay clear when they come back. I'll handle it." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but don't hesitate to call me if things escalate." Alexander's gaze lingered on the horizon as Mallory drove away. He could feel the storm brewing, but he was ready. The bikers had underestimated him once. They wouldn't get another chance.